Imagine, Toronto, 2016. Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and Princess Eugenie find themselves at the epicenter of a chaotic event that could have erased the monarchy from the face of the earth. Whispers of illicit substances, panic, and evidence erasure, all nearly leading to the arrest of royals. But what really happened in that penthouse? Why are Meghan's former friends now betraying her secrets, revealing her role in such parties? Watch until the end. The truth will blow your mind. They say some secrets are buried so deep they're never meant to see the light of day, but every so often the past finds a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how carefully it's been concealed. And right now, whispers from Meghan Markle's Toronto days are doing just that, surfacing in ways she never anticipated. Because sources close to her former circle are finally talking about one specific night in 2016, a night that reportedly involved Prince Harry, Princess Eugenie, and a situation so volatile it had to be erased before dawn. Rumors are swirling around the city that this wasn't just another glamorous evening in Toronto's elite circles. It was something darker, something that teetered on the brink of a full-blown scandal before it could be contained. For years, Meghan's pre-royal life has been carefully sanitized, polished to a sheen for public consumption. The Suits actress turned duchess, the humanitarian who captured a prince's heart. It's a fairy tale. It was sold to the world, and most people bought it without question. But behind that meticulously constructed story lies another one that the people who knew her back then have kept secret until now. Because according to insiders from the exclusive Toronto Soho House set, Meghan wasn't just a member of that world. She was at its very center, the person people turned to when they wanted an unforgettable night, the woman who could make things happen that others couldn't. And on that night in 2016, things reportedly went sideways in a way that no one expected. The gathering was supposed to be intimate, exclusive, just a handful of trusted people behind closed doors. But somewhere between the champagne and sunrise, something went catastrophically wrong. Sources suggest there was panic, confusion, a frantic scramble to contain a situation that was seconds away from involving the authorities. Phones were ringing, people were moved, and by morning, it was like the entire evening had been wiped from existence. No reports, no witnesses willing to speak, no trace of what really happened. Just silence. The kind of silence that only comes when powerful people want a problem to disappear. But here's where things get even more explosive. The names allegedly involved in that night weren't just Meghan and Harry. Princess Eugenie, a member of the royal family, was also reportedly there, caught in the epicenter of whatever chaos unfolded. If that's true, if a royal was present when everything went wrong, then the stakes suddenly become clear. This wasn't just about protecting Meghan's image. It was about protecting the crown itself from a scandal that could have destroyed everything before the romance with Harry even went public. Now, years later, as Meghan and Harry's carefully crafted brand shows cracks, former friends are starting to wonder aloud. They're questioning why they stayed silent for so long. They're doubting the loyalty that kept them quiet while Meghan rewrote her history. And, most dangerously of all, they're starting to talk about what really happened that night, the night that was never supposed to be remembered. The details of that 2016 night have been kept under wraps for years, but the fragments that are emerging paint a picture that's impossible to ignore. According to sources who were part of Toronto's elite social scene at the time, the evening started innocently enough. Meghan was hosting a get-together at a rented penthouse, one of those sleek modern spaces high above the city where privacy was guaranteed and questions were never asked. The guest list was small, carefully curated, a gathering of people where everyone understood the unspoken rules. Harry was in town, visiting Meghan. Their relationship was still new enough to feel electric, still secret enough to feel dangerous. And then there was Eugenie, whose presence that night adds a layer to the story that no one saw coming. Insiders claimed that the atmosphere was supposed to be relaxed, champagne flowing, music playing, the kind of night where Toronto's powerful and connected could unwind. But somewhere in the middle of it all, something shifted. Rumors say that Meghan stepped out at one point, supposedly to retrieve something extra, though what that was has never been clarified. When she returned, the atmosphere had completely changed. Sources suggest there was a moment of realization, a sudden understanding that the situation was about to spiral out of control. There are reports of someone panicking, voices rising, a chaos that's difficult to explain started unfolding in real time, and then there was a dangerous moment. Whispers from people connected to that night claimed that police intervention was narrowly avoided, that neighbors or building security suspected something, and the authorities were seconds away from showing up. If that had happened, if law enforcement had walked into that penthouse and discovered a British prince, a royal princess, and whatever was allegedly going on, the scandal would have been nuclear. Careers would have been over. Reputations would have been destroyed, and the palace would have faced a crisis unlike anything they'd seen in years. But somehow it didn't happen. Phones went silent. People vanished into the night, and by the time the sun rose, it was as if nothing had occurred. Those who knew what happened were allegedly asked, or perhaps told, to forget. Some sources suggest there were conversations about loyalty, about understanding that some things had to stay buried to protect everyone. Others whisper that money changed hands, that ensuring silence wasn't just a polite request. It was about making it worth people's while. Whatever methods were used, they worked. The story never reached the press, never became a headline, didn't even become a rumor that gained traction. It simply vanished, erased from Toronto's collective memory as if it had never existed. But erasers are never permanent. Stories like this have a way of resurfacing, especially when the people who buried them start wondering why they were protecting someone who walked away without looking back. And now, as former friends watch Meghan navigate her post-royal life, some of them are starting to ask themselves why they stayed silent in the first place. Long before Meghan Markle was the Duchess of Sussex, before the royal wedding and the palace drama, she was a queen of a different sort in Toronto. Soho House wasn't just a private club for her. It was her kingdom, her stage, a place where she moved through the halls as if she owned them. And according to people who saw her in that world, she did. Sources who knew her during those years describe a woman who understood power in a way that most people never grasp. Someone who knew that influence wasn't about titles or money. It was about access and connections. And Meghan had both in abundance. Toronto's Soho House scene was exclusive by design, a place where you couldn't just buy your way in. You had to be connected. You had to be useful. You had to bring something to the table that made you worthy of being in the know. Meghan brought everything. She knew actors, producers, financiers, people who could make things happen with a phone call. But, more than that, she knew how to read a room, how to sense what people wanted before they asked. Insiders claimed that this made her invaluable in circles where discretion was currency, and knowing the right person could change your trajectory. But it wasn't just about professional connections. The nights at Soho House stretched far beyond business hours, bleeding into sunrise after parties where real bonds were forged. These weren't events that ended up on social media or in the gossip columns. They were gatherings where Toronto's elite could shed their carefully maintained public images, where they could indulge without judgment, where the normal rules didn't apply. And Meghan, according to sources close to that scene, was often at the center of it all. People who were there described her as magnetic, drawing attention without demanding it, making everyone feel like they were part of something exclusive simply by being in her presence. Rumors said she had a talent for making things happen that others couldn't. When someone needed an introduction, Meghan knew who to call. When a party needed an extra spark to make it unforgettable, she knew exactly what would elevate it. Insiders whispered that she became the go-to person when people wanted something specific, something discreet, something that required knowing exactly who to ask and how to ask. In those circles, that kind of reliability made her more than just popular. It made her indispensable. She wasn't just attending the party. She was often the reason the party was worth attending. Sources close to the Toronto scene at the time claimed that Meghan thrived in this role, being the person people needed, the one who could deliver what others couldn't. She understood that in elite social circles, value wasn't about what you possessed. It was about what you could provide. And according to rumors, Meghan could provide almost anything. That power, that sense of control over rooms full of influential people, became intoxicating. And according to rumors that are now resurfacing, it's that role that would later intersect with Harry in ways no one could have foreseen. The whisper that won't die down isn't about champagne and social chatter. It's about something far more specific. Something that people who were part of that Toronto scene have danced around for years without saying directly. Because according to insiders who saw Meghan's role at those late-night gatherings, she wasn't just a host or a connector. Sources suggest she was a facilitator, someone who ensured that the party never stopped, who knew exactly where to find what guests were looking for when the night called for more than conversation and cocktails. Now, no one uses those words directly. That's the point of these circles. Everyone speaks in code, carefully chosen phrases that imply without confirming. But the picture that emerges from multiple sources is hard to ignore. People close to that scene claim that Meghan had a reputation for being able to deliver, for having access to things that kept the energy flowing when ordinary gatherings wound down. Insiders suggest that this was what made her so valuable. Not just her charm or connections, but her ability to ensure that when Toronto's elite wanted to escape reality for a night, everything they needed was readily available. The word that keeps surfacing, whispered by people who were there, is provider. Not in any official capacity, not as part of some operation, but as someone who knew the people who could make a call, and whatever was needed would appear discreetly and efficiently. Sources close to the situation claim that this wasn't unusual in those circles, that having a reliable person who could provide without drama was considered an asset, not a liability. In a world where privacy and discretion were everything, Meghan reportedly became the person who was trusted to keep things running smoothly, to ensure that the night unfolded exactly as it should, without complications or unwanted attention. There are reports that this role extended beyond simply knowing the right people. Insiders whisper that Meghan understood the unspoken economy of elite social scenes, that providing access to experiences that others couldn't secure created loyalty, created power, created a network of people who were indebted to her in some way. And in a world where influence mattered more than almost anything else, that kind of network was worth its weight in gold. Sources suggest that this is how she built her position in Toronto's most exclusive circles, not just by being charming, beautiful, or connected, but by being useful in a way that made her indispensable. Behind closed doors, people say that this pattern wasn't a one-off. The wedding in Jamaica with Trevor Engelson, where guests reportedly remember her showing up with over 100 pre-rolled joints, perfectly arranged and ready to go. The Toronto nights where parties stretched until dawn, and people never seemed to run out of whatever they needed to keep going. The gatherings where Meghan was always at the center, always ensuring that everything ran smoothly. According to whispers from former friends, it was her signature, her way of ensuring she was never just another face in the crowd. And if these rumors are true, it means that the 2016 night with Harry and Eugenie wasn't an anomaly. It was business as usual until suddenly it wasn't. Prince Harry wasn't looking for someone to fix him when he met Meghan. He was looking for someone who understood him, someone who didn't flinch at the parts of himself that the palace had tried to smooth over for years. And according to sources close to their early relationship, Meghan was exactly that person. She didn't lecture him about responsibility, image, or the burden of the crown. She let him breathe, allowed him to be the version of himself that felt real, not rehearsed. And in a life where almost everything was scripted, that kind of freedom was intoxicating. Harry's reputation preceded him long before Meghan came on the scene. The rebellious royal, the party prince, the soldier who drank too much, laughed too loud, and carried scars that the palaces couldn't heal. He had spent years trying to escape the expectations, the comparisons to William, the constant scrutiny that came with being the spare, not the heir. Insiders claimed that he was restless in a way that the royals didn't know how to handle, searching for something authentic in a world built entirely on tradition and protocol. When he found Meghan, sources suggest, he found someone who didn't try to change that restlessness, but embraced it. Rumors said that Meghan understood Harry's wild side because she had spent years navigating her own version of it in Toronto's elite circles. She knew what it was like to live in two worlds, to present one face publicly while keeping another side private and untamed. There are reports that she didn't judge Harry for wanting to escape, for needing nights where he could forget he was a prince and just be a man. According to people close to the situation, she made those nights possible. She created spaces for him to relax, free from photographers, palace officials, or the next day's headlines. This, it's rumored, made her irresistible to him. She wasn't trying to save him, fix him, or mold him into something more palatable to the public. Sources suggest she joined him instead, matched his energy, understanding that sometimes the best way to connect with someone is not to pull them into your world, but to meet them in theirs. Insiders claim the nights they spent together in Toronto weren't about red carpets or royal protocol. They were about freedom, about feeling like he could finally exhale after years on the edge. And according to whispers from people who saw their relationship in those early days, Meghan knew exactly how to provide that freedom. She knew where to take him, where privacy was guaranteed, knew who could be trusted to keep a secret, knew how to curate evenings where rules didn't apply, and Harry could simply exist without consequence. Reports suggest this is what bonded them so intensely and quickly. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She became his escape route, the person who made him feel he could be himself without apology. But that kind of freedom comes with risks. And on that alleged night in 2016, the night Eugenie was present and chaos unfolded, sources claim those risks nearly caught up with them all in a way that could have shattered everything. Princess Eugenie's presence that night is the detail that transforms this story from Toronto gossip into something far more complex. Because if the rumors are true, if a member of the royal family was indeed there when things supposedly went south, the stakes suddenly become exponentially higher. It wasn't just about protecting Meghan's image or even Harry's reputation. Sources suggest it was about containing a situation that could damage the monarchy itself, a scandal that would have extended far beyond a single reckless evening. Eugenie's relationship with Harry has always been described as close, the kind of bond that comes from growing up in the same impossible world, where normalcy is a luxury and privacy is a myth. Insiders claim they understood each other in a way no one else could, shared the unique burden of royal status without being vitally important, lived under constant scrutiny while being convinced they weren't important enough to matter. Reports suggest that closeness meant Eugenie was someone Harry trusted implicitly, someone he could be himself with without judgment or repercussions. But her alleged presence at that Toronto gathering adds a dimension no one anticipated. Rumor has it Eugenie wasn't just visiting. She was part of what unfolded that night, caught up in the same chaos that nearly unraveled everything. Sources close to the situation suggest she might have been there precisely because Harry trusted her, because she was someone who wouldn't report back to the palace, someone who understood the need to escape the gilded cage, even if only for a night. Insiders whisper that this made her complicit, whether she intended to be or not. The implications are staggering if you really consider them. If the authorities had shown up, if that dicey moment with the police had actually materialized, the fallout wouldn't have been just on Harry. Eugenie would have been there too, a princess whose father was already dealing with his own escalating scandals, whose family couldn't afford another headline that made the royals look reckless or out of control. According to people connected to royal circles, that's why the situation had to be erased so completely and so swiftly. It wasn't about protecting one individual. It was about protecting the entire institution. Sources suggest the palace went into crisis management mode the moment they caught wind of what almost happened. Phone calls were allegedly made at the highest levels. There were discussions about damage control and containment. Decisions were made about who needed to be silenced and what incentives would ensure that silence. Reports are that Eugenie's involvement made the cleanup operation even more urgent, even more thorough, because the consequences of having two royals involved in whatever went down that night would have been devastating in a way the monarchy might not have recovered from. Behind closed doors, people say that's why the Toronto chapter disappeared so completely. It wasn't just about burying Meghan's past. It was about protecting Eugenie, about ensuring whatever happened that night could never be traced back to a member of the family. And according to the rumors now surfacing, that protection came at a cost, one that some people are no longer willing to pay. The morning after the alleged 2016 incident, Toronto collectively forgot. It wasn't a gradual fading of memory. Sources claim it was instantaneous and absolute, the kind of silence that only happens when powerful forces decide a story needs to be erased. According to insiders who were part of that scene, people who had been talking about the chaotic evening suddenly clammed up. Phones were changed, and conversations that had been freely flowing just hours before were suddenly off limits. It was as if someone had hit a reset button on the entire city's social circuit. Rumors say it wasn't accidental. Reports are that a quiet operation began within days of the incident, methodical and thorough, to a degree that suggested serious resources were being deployed. Sources close to the situation suggest that phone records were scrutinized, hotel staff who might have seen something were talked to. Anyone who could potentially connect the dots was either incentivized to forget or strategically excluded from the narrative. Insiders whisper the cleanup was professional, the kind of operation that doesn't happen without coordination at the highest levels. People who knew Meghan during those Toronto years have claimed they noticed a shift almost immediately. Friends who had been close suddenly found themselves on the outside, their calls unanswered. their invitations to gatherings mysteriously rescinded. According to sources familiar with her social circle at the time, it wasn't just distance, it was deletion. Former friends described being unfollowed on social media, blocked from contact, erased as if years of friendship had never existed. Insiders suggest this was strategic, a way to ensure that anyone who might know too much about her past no longer had a platform to share those stories, but it extended beyond personal relationships. Reports are that local gossip columnists, the ones who would typically thrive on this kind of scandal, went completely silent on the topic. Sources suggest that individuals who might have spoken were given very clear reasons not to, whether through carefully worded conversations about loyalty or through more tangible incentives that made silence worth their while. Behind closed doors, whispers suggest some individuals were generously compensated for their discretion, while others were simply made aware that speaking out would have consequences they wouldn't want to experience. The alleged involvement of the palace in this erasure makes sense when you consider the timeline. By late 2016, Harry and Meghan's relationship was getting serious, and the royal family was already preparing for the possibility that she might become part of their world. Sources close to royal operations claim they couldn't afford loose ends, couldn't risk stories from her past surfacing at an inconvenient moment. According to insiders, the vetting process for anyone entering the royal family is intense. But when there are specific incidents that need to be contained, the machine moves even faster and more decisively. The result of all this careful management was a version of Meghan Markle that felt almost manufactured. The Toronto chapter was gone, replaced by a sanitized narrative of a successful actress living a glamorous but ultimately innocuous life. And for years that version held, protected by the silence of everyone who knew otherwise. Long before Prince Harry, there was Trevor Engelson, the Hollywood producer who married Meghan in Jamaica and thought he understood the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. But, according to sources close to that relationship, Trevor only ever saw the versions of Meghan she wanted him to see, the polished surfaces that hid deeper patterns he wouldn't fully realize until much later. And now, years after their marriage ended in a divorce delivered by mail along with her rings, people are wondering what Trevor really knows about those Toronto nights, and why he's never said a word about any of it. That Jamaican wedding became legendary for one particular detail. Guests who were there remember Meghan arriving with bags full of marijuana, over 100 joints by many accounts, perfectly prepared and given out as party favors. Sources familiar with the event claimed it wasn't considered shocking within their circle. It was considered quintessentially Meghan, a woman who took care of every detail, who ensured her wedding would be an unforgettable experience. Insiders suggest it was her signature move, being the person who elevated ordinary moments into something memorable through meticulous planning and attention to what people wanted. But, looking back through the lens of what allegedly happened later in Toronto, that Jamaican moment takes on a different meaning. Reports are that this pattern of being a provider, a facilitator, the person who kept the parties going, wasn't just a one-off choice for a wedding. According to whispers from people who knew her during her marriage, it was how Meghan operated consistently, accumulating social capital by being useful in ways that made her indispensable to those around her. Trevor has remained remarkably silent about all of this. While others from Meghan's past have spoken, some cautiously and some less so. He has maintained a dignified distance that royal watchers find both admirable and frustrating. Sources suggest he knows far more than he's ever shared. That years of marriage to Meghan mean he witnessed patterns and behaviors that would lend context to everything that has happened since. Behind closed doors, people wonder what stories he could tell about her social circles, her methods for building influence, her approach to relationships that always seem to have strategic elements just beneath the surface. Rumors are, Trevor's silence isn't just a choice to take the high road. Insiders claim there might be agreements in place, arrangements that ensure certain stories remain buried. But as Meghan's carefully constructed narrative continues to crack, some wonder how long that silence can last. Understanding Meghan means understanding how she inhabited separate worlds that never intersected, how she presented entirely different versions of herself depending on who was watching. Sources who knew her during different periods of her life describe a woman with an almost uncanny ability for compartmentalization, for sealing off her various identities so that people in one circle had no idea the others existed. And, according to insiders, this skill didn't happen by accident. It was cultivated, perfected, and ultimately became a tool that allowed her to transition from Toronto socialite to British royal without the dots being connected. Her Suits co-stars saw one version: an approachable actress, witty and warm, someone who seemed genuinely invested in friendship and collaboration. Reports suggest she played this role flawlessly, never letting them glimpse the woman who ruled Toronto nights or the strategic operator who was already planning her next move. Insiders claim her colleagues genuinely believed they knew her, had no idea there were entire dimensions to her life that remained completely hidden from view. Then there was the Toronto Circle, where she operated with an entirely different energy. Sources from that scene described someone confident and commanding, fluent in the unspoken rules of the high-end nightlife, comfortable wielding the kind of social power that came from knowing what people wanted before they asked. Rumor has it this version of Meghan understood transactional relationships, knew how to be valuable in ways that created loyalty and obligation. According to people who saw her in that world, she thrived on being in control, on being the person everyone wanted something from. But the version she reserved for Harry was different still. Yet insiders claim she presented herself as understanding and supportive, a woman who listened without judgment, who made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Sources close to their early relationship suggest she became what he needed her to be, seamlessly adapting to fit his emotional landscape, never revealing the other worlds she simultaneously inhabited. Reports are that this ability to morph made her irresistible to him, made him believe he'd found someone uniquely suited to understanding his complicated life. People who knew her in different contexts acknowledge they never fully understood where they stood with her. She could be warm and engaging one moment, distant and unavailable the next, switching between connection and detachment so rapidly it disoriented people. According to sources familiar with her patterns, no one ever got the full picture because Meghan made sure the full picture never existed in one place. Each world saw only what she wanted it to see, and the walls between those worlds remained firmly erected until they collapsed. The question everyone is asking now is simple: why are people talking? After years of guarded silence, after watching Meghan transform from Toronto socialite to global icon, why are former friends suddenly willing to whisper about nights they agreed to forget? According to sources close to the situation, the answer isn't straightforward. It's layered with resentment, broken promises, a slow realization that the loyalty they offered was never reciprocated. Insiders claim the shift began when Meghan left Toronto, and those friendships simply evaporated. People who had been close, who had shared countless nights, secrets, and experiences, suddenly found themselves on the outside with no explanation. Sources familiar with her social circle at the time have described a sense of being used and discarded, a realization that once they no longer served a purpose in her new narrative, they were deleted as if they never mattered. Insiders suggest such erasure leaves wounds that don't heal easily, especially when you watch someone rewrite history to exclude you entirely. But it's more than just hurt feelings. Rumor has it that some former friends are closely watching Meghan's post-royal brand, seeing how she's positioning herself as authentic, honest, and a victim, and feeling that this narrative erases the truth about who she really was. Reports suggest that people who saw her Toronto years, who saw how she acted and what she was willing to secure, find the current version inconsistent with the woman they knew. Whispers from that circle suggest growing resentment that they've remained silent while she completely controls the narrative. A catalyst, sources suggest, could be the ongoing cracks in Meghan and Harry's carefully constructed image as their projects stumble and their brand loses its luster. Former friends are, allegedly, questioning why they are still protecting someone who walked away from them without looking back. Behind closed doors, people are saying that the agreements that kept them silent seem less binding when the person they were protecting is no longer untouchable, no longer the Golden Duchess whose image needed to be preserved at all costs. Some insiders suggest there is also safety in numbers. Now that more whispers are surfacing, now that more people are hinting that they know stories they haven't told, it becomes easier for others to add their voices without feeling alone against someone powerful. According to sources connected to Toronto social circles, the protective wall that kept Meghan's past buried is cracking, and once those cracks start to spread, they are incredibly difficult to contain. The dangerous night in 2016 might just be the beginning of what surfaces. If the full story of that 2016 night ever comes out completely, the repercussions would extend far beyond embarrassment or gossip. Sources close to royal operations suggest that it could fundamentally damage what's left of Meghan and Harry's carefully constructed brand, the narrative they've spent years building about authenticity, victimhood, and liberation from toxic systems. Because if accusations emerge that Meghan facilitated illegal activity while dating the prince, and even in the presence of the princess, then suddenly every claim of being misunderstood or unfairly targeted will look very different. Insiders suggest the repercussions would hit on multiple fronts simultaneously. The remaining royal relationships, already strained to the breaking point, would face impossible questions about what family members knew and when they knew it. Reports suggest that the palace would once again be forced into crisis management mode, this time without the ability to simply bury the story, as Meghan and Harry are no longer under their protection. Rumors indicate that it could reignite the debate about whether proper vetting was conducted before the marriage, whether warning signs were ignored, whether the entire situation was mismanaged from the start. But perhaps most importantly, sources claim it would shatter the narrative that Meghan and Harry have sold to their remaining supporters. The brand they've built depends on them being misunderstood victims of a cruel system, people whose only sin is wanting authenticity and love. According to insiders, substantiated stories of reckless behavior involving illegal substances and members of the royal family would fundamentally undermine that position. Behind closed doors, people say that's why the silence has held for so long. Why so much effort was put into completely erasing that Toronto chapter? The truth is, some secrets carry a weight that never diminishes, and if former friends decide their loyalty has limits, if Trevor Engelson ever breaks his silence, if even one person from that night decides the story deserves to be told, everything Meghan and Harry have built could collapse faster than anyone imagines. The dangerous night might have been buried, but buried things have a way of resurfacing when you least expect it.